This is my idea of the perfect Cyberdeck for 3D printing. I built it to monitor my printers, control them, do CAD, and basically run everything I need in the workshop. For me, it was really important that this isn't just a fun project, but something that actually has a place in my daily workflow. But before getting into the build, it probably makes sense to take a quick step back. At its core, a Cyberdeck is a self-contained computer usually built for a very specific task. It's portable, custom-built, and designed around how you want to use it and not how a manufacturer thinks you should use it. And that idea really stuck with me. So before designing anything, I asked my community what they would expect from a Cyberdeck for 3D printing. And three things came up again and again. People wanted enough power for CAD and design, live printer control and monitoring, and something portable that's easy to carry around the workshop. Those 3 points pretty much defined the direction of this build. With that in mind, I got to work. The first step was a very rough design sketch. Nothing detailed, no exact dimensions, just a way to think through the layout. Where does the screen sit? Where does the computer go? Where does the weight end up? At this stage, it's less about looks and more about feasibility. Once the basic layout made sense, I started thinking about the electronics, because without the right core system, none of this would really work, and this turned out to be the biggest challenge. I needed something that has enough power for CAD, is compact, energy efficient, and not just a Raspberry Pi replacement. That's where today's sponsor comes in. Khadas reached out to me about building this project together, and they provided the core system for this Cyberdeck. The Mind 2 is a surprisingly powerful mini PC, compact, quiet, and easily strong enough for things like CAD, slicing, and day-to-day work in the workshop. But what really makes it interesting for this project is its modular design. Because the Mind 2 isn't just the compute unit for this Cyberdeck, I can take it out and dock it into the Mind Graphics, turning it into a full desktop class system with a dedicated GPU, without changing my files, my setup, or my workflow. That flexibility completely changed how I work, and it's the reason this Cyberdeck actually makes sense in daily use. If you're interested in this kind of modular hardware, I've linked everything in the video description. And honestly, this might end up being one of my favorite pieces of tech this year. For now, let's finish going through the components. To make this system portable, I needed a battery solution, so I went with a 25,000 mAh power bank. For the main display, I wanted something large enough for CAD work, so I chose a 15.6-inch touchscreen. For quick status information and printer control, I added 3 small OLED displays. Those are driven by an ESP32 together with a rotary encoder for input. And finally, I added a status LED strip to give me a quick visual overview of what my printers are doing. With all of that planned out, it was time to start with the physical build. So let's begin. Once the hardware was in place, it was time for the first real test of the electronics. After flashing the ESP and connecting all the components, I could finally test the system that handles control and monitoring for my 3D printers for the first time. To make this setup flexible and future-proof, the ESP doesn't work on its own. It gets all of its information directly from my Home Assistant. That makes it really easy to add new devices later on and also to control other things in the workshop like lighting or additional machines. What this system can do in the end goes a bit further, but for now the most important thing was simply that everything worked reliably. The back of the Cyberdeck was especially important to me because this is where modularity really comes into play. The Mind 2, which acts as the central compute unit, is held in place using a snap-in system and can be removed later on. That was a key requirement from the start. I didn't want the computer to be permanently fixed in the Cyberdeck. The same goes for the power bank. It's not permanently built in either, which means I can remove it and use it somewhere else if I need to. I also added a small stand to the back, which works really well together with the carry handle and makes the Cyberdeck more comfortable to use. The main display is connected via a single USB-C cable, which handles power, video and audio all at the same time. To keep an eye on power usage, I decided to use USB-C cables with small built-in displays that show the current power draw of the connected devices. It's a small detail, but surprisingly useful in everyday use. At this point, most of the Cyberdeck was finished, but there was still one important detail missing on the front. The OLED displays were already working, but I didn't want to leave them exposed, so the next step was to make proper covers for them. Instead of 3D printing those parts, I decided to mill them from acrylic on my CNC. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference visually and helps the whole front look a lot more finished. So before testing the system as a whole, I moved over to the CNC and milled the acrylic covers for the displays. Once those were done, I could finally install them. With that last piece in place, the build was finally complete, at least for this first version. With everything assembled, I could finally start using the Cyberdeck the way it was meant to be used. And instead of just turning it on and moving on, I thought it makes sense to take a closer look at what this system can actually do at this point and why I built it the way I did. So before getting into the smaller displays and controls, let's start with the main part of the setup. The main display is directly connected to the Mind 2 and acts as the primary interface for everything I do on the Cyberdeck. This is where most of the actual work happens. I can use it for CAD applications, control my machines or work in the slicer. It's basically everything I need to run my workshop digitally in one place. For most everyday tasks, the touchscreen works surprisingly well, especially for quick adjustments. I can slice a model, send it to the printer, and start a print directly from the Cyberdeck without switching devices. Even though I'm not a gamer, it's interesting to see that you can actually run games on the Cyberdeck as well. Of course, graphics performance becomes the limiting factor here. But this is also where Khadas has a really elegant solution. Because the Mind 2 isn't permanently fixed in the Cyberdeck, I can simply take it out and move it over to my main workstation. There, it slots into the Mind Graphics, which adds a dedicated GPU and turns the whole system into a very powerful full desktop setup with modern specs and a high-end graphics card. At my desk, this setup has become my main working machine over the last weeks. Even larger CAD projects and demanding renders are no problem thanks to the added GPU power. What I really like about this approach is the modularity. I can finish a design at my main workstation, then take the Mind 2 out of the dock, clip it back into the Cyberdeck and continue working right where I left off. All my files are there, all my applications are still open, and nothing needs to be synced or transferred. I don't have to move projects between different computers and I still get a lot of performance in a very compact and flexible setup. For me, that's a huge advantage, and it completely changed how I think about using one system across different environments. Now, let's move on to the 3 OLED displays and what they're actually used for. I already mentioned that the ESP32 is connected to my home assistant, and this is where the system really starts to show its strengths. As a first example, I integrated a simple printer control interface. Using the rotary encoder, I can select different printers on the first display. In my case, I added 2 of my Bambu Lab P1S printers. Once a printer is selected, the display immediately shows useful information like the current print progress, the printer state, the bed temperature, and whether everything is running as expected. The status LED strip underneath the Cyberdeck works together with this view. When a printer is selected and I press the encoder once, the LED strip reflects the current state of that printer. If a print is finished, the strip lights up green. If the printer is idle, it shows blue. And while a print is running, the length of the illuminated LED strip represents the current print progress. That means I can place the Cyberdeck anywhere in the workshop, select a printer, and immediately see at a glance what's going on and roughly when a print will be finished. This turned out to be surprisingly practical, especially because the ESP and the OLED displays consume very little power, while still giving me a clear visual overview of my printers at all times. The second display is used to control the LED strip itself. My initial idea here was to turn it into a simple work light. Using the rotary encoder, I can adjust the brightness of the LED strip and use it as a small task light, for example when soldering or quickly checking something on a printer. Over time, I realized that adding a stand to the Cyberdeck would make this even more useful. With the Cyberdeck slightly elevated, the LED strip can work as a proper desk or workbench light, which turned out to be a really nice addition. The third display is used for general workshop control. Since everything is connected through Home Assistant anyway, it made sense to integrate basic workshop functions here as well. As a simple example, I added control for the main ceiling light in my workshop. By pressing the encoder, I can turn the light on or off directly from the Cyberdeck. Of course, this is just a starting point. There's a lot more that could be added here, and that's where I'd really love your input. Let me know in the comments which functions you think should definitely be part of this Cyberdeck in the future. And with that, the first version of the Cyberdeck is finished. It's working, it's usable, and it already has a clear place in my workshop. This definitely won't be the last version though. I'm planning a second video where I'll take your ideas and try to integrate as many of them as possible into the next iteration. So feel free to be part of that and let me know in the comments what you think this Cyberdeck should be able to do next or what you'd like to see improved. I also want to say a big thank you to Khadas for providing the Mind 2 and the Mind Graphics. Those two really made this project possible in the first place and turned it into something that's not just a concept, but a genuinely useful tool that I actually enjoy working with. And if you're looking for a bit more inspiration, you might also enjoy the video where I built my custom timer project. I'll link it here if you want to check it out. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.